Hello everybody and welcome to Women in Football's latest webinar. We continue to be extremely grateful for our support that we get from all of you, so thank you so much. And the feedback we're receiving about this series of webinars is positive and encouraging, so we're so glad that you're enjoying them. As you know, we set these up in response to the COVID crisis and lockdown, but they've been so popular and we think so useful to you and to us that we hope to continue them, whatever the new normal across the globe looks like. So we'll be carrying on with this series, and do let us know via email if you'd like to see a webinar on any particular topic. The email is events@womeninfootball.co.uk. But turning to today, thank you to Maria, Alan, Margie, Dominic and Imogen for joining us. We're delighted to have you all for what I know will be an informative and engaging conversation about employment rights, particularly in the COVID situation and the post-COVID world. What are the legal rights of an employee? When does a consultation apply? How to navigate redundancy without involving recourse to law, and through to opportunities for future employment. And of course, we're sorry that we have to be talking about this topic today, but we know what's going on out in the big world and it's going to be a tough time. But hopefully for not everybody, and hopefully we'll give you some good advice to help you navigate through if unfortunately you're affected by that. I should say that to the extent we talk about law today, it will be UK law, not law in other territories. So let me introduce you to our wonderful panel. Chairing today is Solicitor Maria Patsalos, who's a partner at Mishcon de Reya, where she is a member of the firm's sports group and has a focus within that sports group on immigration law. She regularly advises football clubs regarding visas for players and has also advised in relation to rugby, golf and darts. Her clients benefit from her vast technical knowledge and experience in dealing with exceptional cases, as well as her ability to provide innovative and bespoke solutions. She also founded and supervises the immigration element of Pink Law, a free legal service for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender individuals run via Queen Mary University. She is a great friend of Women in Football and provides us with pro bono legal advice as well, for which we are supremely grateful. Welcome, Maria. Next up is Alan Layton, another great friend of Women in Football. Alan is the National Secretary for Prospect Trade Union and has extensive experience in representing members working in sport, including referees, umpires and ground staff. And Alan has advised WIF members on various employment issues. So welcome, Alan. Next up, we come to another great friend of Women in Football, Margie Cruz Blanco, who works at Adecco. She's a featured speaker at international conferences and events. She's a regular mentor, facilitator and lecturer within educational initiatives. Her work in the sports industry includes with organisations such as the IOC, World Archery and FIFA, where she worked for a decade as Global Head of Women's Football Development. She has a role as Global Head of Athletes Programmes at the Adecco Group, and as well as that, she's founder of Sport Equity International Foundation and collaborates on a number of other projects. I've known Margie for a couple of years now. She's expert, she's a brilliant teacher, she's a giving person with super values, another great friend of ours. Welcome, Margie.
Thank you, Jane.
Also joining us today is Dominic Boone. Dominic is a colleague at Mishcon de Reya. He's a colleague of Maria's and he's a managing associate in the employment team. He provides advice to companies and individuals on a wide range of employment issues and has recently been spending time advising clients on their response to COVID-19. I suspect we may be touching on UK employment law today. So Dominic, great to have you on board. And completing this wonderful lineup is Imogen Sanders. Imogen is a senior consultant at global executive search firm Perrett Laver. Perrett Laver is ranked in the top 3 of global search firms focused on mission-driven sectors and themes, and ranked in the top 30 of all search firms worldwide. Perrett Laver have significant expertise supporting leadership transitions across sport, which is how I first got to know them, where I know they do a lot of fantastic work with leadership and boards in this country, but their work also includes cultural organisations, education, research, healthcare, philanthropic and non-profit organisations. Imogen leads Perrett Laver's sports practice, and this was founded with the ambition to support leaders who will be catalysts for positive outcomes across sport, and indeed across wider society, mindful of sport's unique position in driving values and acting as a role model. Imogen's work includes the current Sport England and UK Sport Diversity in Non-Executive Leadership campaign, and creating a network of board-ready candidates to support the diversity goals of that sector, which is basically the whole of British sport. Other clients have included London Sport, the Harlequins Foundation, Invictus Games Foundation, and the Big Lottery Fund. She also runs Perrett Laver's corporate responsibility team, and if you think that might keep her busy, well, she has time for some outside work as well, and she's the governor of Rutherford House School. Welcome, Imogen. And on that note, I will now hand over to Maria and look forward to a very interesting and useful discussion.
Thank you very much, Jane. Really appreciate that introduction. I'm just going to set some ground rules for everyone before briefly saying a few words myself about my lockdown experience, and I will then hand over to each of the panelists who I'm very excited to speak to today with various questions. First of all, each panelist will tell us about their lockdown experience before we delve into the topic we have today. So just some minor housekeeping. The ground rules are obviously feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat. Select all attendees. I can see that lots of people are already doing that, so that's fantastic news. Just say who you are, what you do, and where you're from. And obviously, if you are using the chat facility, please keep it positive, respectful, and polite. So in relation to my lockdown experience, as with everyone, it's been quite an interesting time. For me personally, I wasn't very technologically advanced, so this experience has really got me up to date with that. I didn't even have a laptop, so I was doing everything remotely from my phone before now, but as you can see, I'm on my laptop now, and I'm fully able to work from home in a very seamless way, I say, before I cut out at some point during this panel, hopefully not. I'm not expecting any Amazon deliveries today, so if there are any buzzing at the door, please do excuse that as well. These are the issues from working from home that we've all had to deal with during the lockdown. Managing home and work life has been a challenge, which I'm sure everyone will agree with. In relation to the work itself, I think in relation to immigration and sport, we were already dealing with the uncertainties of Brexit and what that's going to bring to the sporting world. The new rules haven't even been implemented yet. We don't know what they look like for footballers coming in the January transfer window. So that's all up in the air. Then you throw Corona into the mix and we've really got a very difficult working environment. But let's move on to our exciting panelists. So I'm going to move over to Dom first. Dominic is as Jane said, a colleague of mine at Mishcon. So Dominic, it would be great if you could give us an overview of the redundancy process that employers are expected to cover. Obviously, during these tough times, redundancy is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. We appreciate that there may be nuances between employers due to the size of the workforce, of course, and the roles being made redundant, but an overview would be helpful for our members who are obviously anxious about what may happen in their respective companies. So Dom, take it away.
Great, thanks, Maria. I suppose, as requested, I should say my lockdown experience has probably had a lot of similarities with other people. I think for me, I remember on sort of day 2 of proper lockdown, announcing during a run that I intended to emerge from lockdown healthier and fitter than I started it. And I can report with some confidence that I have not achieved that goal. But otherwise, like many people, I've adjusted to working from home, but today I'm speaking to you from within the office. I should say, as has been mentioned, there is a UK focus to this talk, but I do think, I mean, I'm noting, a lot of international comments on the chat. There are points which apply across jurisdictions. There's similarity within Europe, but then also broadly, some of the points and some of the tactics are going to be global in terms of how you might press an employer in a redundancy situation. Moving on to the UK, what will influence a redundancy process is a number of key factors, namely the number of people being made redundant, the competence or sophistication of an employer, particularly one who's PR sensitive, and the involvement of a representative body or union. And I would say those things will really influence the type of process that might be run. In the UK, it's also very significant whether you as an individual have 2 years of employment or not. If you've been employed for 2 years, you will be entitled to bring a claim for unfair dismissal in circumstances where a redundancy process is not followed properly, and you'll also be entitled to a statutory redundancy payment. Now, if you don't have 2 years service, it does not mean that all is lost. There are other entitlements, but it really does influence the claims and the position that you have. Moving on to what a consultation itself might include, it would likely include meetings to discuss the plans for the potential redundancies. It would include the creation of a selection pool from which people might be made redundant. Then from that pool, criteria would be applied to choose which people might be made redundant. And then at the last stage, or in connection with this, there might be a consideration of alternative roles within the employer and within the group. And for those being dismissed, it should be made clear to them what sort of redundancy package they should be getting. So turning into that in a little bit more detail, when it comes to the actual consultation, this will typically involve 1 to 3 discussions relating to potential redundancy and an indication of why they might be needed and what will be paid if redundancies take place. It should also consider alternatives to redundancy. Perhaps people might suspend employment within a group, or there might be a removal of overtime. It needs to be a genuine consideration of alternative roles and where an employer might be able to offer up alternative positions. It really is meant to be a discussion rather than a foregone conclusion. And I would suggest as the first piece of advice that if you are part of a consultation, really try to stop it being a one-way process where you're told, and try and push it towards a discussion where your views are heard as much as possible. It's also important to consider if it really is a redundancy situation. A redundancy is a reduced requirement for work of a particular kind. So if there's a reduced need for advertising, then a marketing team might need to be reduced. But you wouldn't expect a redundancy in situations where you're being replaced by someone who's doing exactly the same role. So if you remove one coach for a football team and replace them with a new hire, that's not really a redundancy process. And I would suggest that that approach would certainly be subject to challenge. Moving on to pooling, this is where individuals with a similar skill set are included in the same group for potential redundancy. So as an example, if a team had 8 physios across the board, it might be that it decides it can only really justify having 6. In that case, there should be a pool of the 8, and then using that pool, an employer will need to determine which individuals might be made redundant by applying objective selection criteria. Now, this combination of choosing a pool and applying selection criteria is something that a lot of employers struggle with, and they quite often get wrong. It's difficult to choose selection criteria which are not discriminatory and which are fair, and it might well be that Alan will be touching on this later. And it's certainly a good position or an opportunity for you to challenge the approach that's taken. I would certainly suggest that an individual asks what pools are being used, why a particular pool has been formed in a particular way, and what criteria are being applied. If at the end of this process or partway through, you are able to establish that you have been made redundant when you should not have been, or there's been an improper process, then you may be able to bring or threaten a claim for unfair dismissal. The maximum award for those claims in the UK is capped at the lower of a year's wages, or approximately £88,500. So this is certainly a claim that you should be bearing in mind in circumstances where there is a redundancy, but there are other claims that are not capped, in particular sex discrimination, and those are the sorts of claims or potentially threats of claims that you might be using to leverage your position if you feel that the process has not been fair. Just to move on now to a slight different flavour of consultation, and what I've just described is really what might happen at the slightly smaller scale, what you typically refer to as individual consultation. The process can be a little bit more complicated and involved if there's a substantial number of job losses proposed within a particular period. And in the UK, if you have 20 or more employees being made redundant within 90 days, you would need to follow a collective consultation process. And put simply, this would involve the employer consulting with either a trade union or an elected body in connection with the redundancy process. So some of the consultation discussions that otherwise might have been a bit more one-to-one are actually going to be with the employer and a trade union or your elected individuals. And what I would say at this point is that as a general rule, if you are able to benefit from union protection or you can join a union, that does tend to improve your position. A union both has the expertise to push for a particular position, but also quite often the leverage and weight to really challenge an employer on its approach. And in that sense, I expect Alan will go into a bit more detail about the sorts of things that might help in that situation. And this is significant as well, because if an employer fails to follow this process properly, if it fails to collectively consult when it should, then each individual can have a claim for up to 90 days gross pay. And across a significant workforce, that is a very big cost for an employer to bear. And it therefore provides some level of pressure to make sure they do things properly. So in a sense, being in a collective consultation position is actually a good place to be if you can. So now moving on from collective consultation, I think it's very important in any position that you're in to be aware of what your baseline entitlements are on redundancy, because it's only when you understand that you can understand what you might be able to push for. And it's relatively common for an employer to present a package that might look attractive, but actually it's exactly what you'd get by operation of law. So it's important to know that. And the default position in the UK is if you have 2 years of service, you're entitled to a statutory redundancy payment. Now there's an online calculator you can use to work out what your entitlement would be, and it comes out top if you Google redundancy calculator, at least from the UK. But as a rule of thumb, it's 1 week's wages for each year of service and capped at £538 per year, but with a slightly higher amount paid if you're in your 40s and above, essentially, or at least for each year worked in your 40s. This amount can be paid tax-free, and it's yours if you're made redundant. There should be no strings attached to that payment. In addition, you're entitled to your notice pay and payment in respect of any accrued but unused holiday. Now, the real value to look for in a redundancy situation is whether an employer has a contractual redundancy pay that's better than what the government requires. And this might be in your employment contract, although that's quite unusual. It might be in an employee handbook, it might be on the intranet, or it might be something that's just formed past practice over time. There's a standard, slightly informal approach. And this is certainly something that you should be exploring if in a redundancy situation, if not before. And it's certainly practice to try and get yourself within a beneficial contractual redundancy scheme if you can. What I should note at this point is that employers can sometimes suggest that people volunteer for redundancy, that they come forward. And this obviously has a level of benefits because it might reduce the need to run a consultation process, and there might be some people who are genuinely ready to move on. I would say, if offered voluntary redundancy, a key point to note is the sort of package that you might expect. And so I would suggest that you essentially calculate the baseline that you would get under statutory redundancy pay in addition to your notice, and then establish whether the amount being offered for voluntary is actually a meaningful amount on top. If it isn't, then it might be that volunteering is not particularly attractive. Before concluding, I just want to quickly mention garden leave. Garden leave is something that takes place typically after notice has been served, and it's something that an employer might do in particular to keep an employee out of the job market. And the idea would be that you carry on being paid during your notice period, except rather than work, you stay at home, or to use the phrase where it comes from, spend some time in your garden if you're lucky enough to have one. For me, you shouldn't really expect to see garden leave during a consultation process, because garden leave suggests that a decision on termination has been made already. It suggests that you're serving out your notice period. During a consultation period, you should actually be having open discussions about whether whether redundancy takes place at all. So if this situation was to occur, I would certainly be asking some questions. So,
thank you very much. Oh, sorry, go on, Dom.
No, that's fine. I was just going to quickly conclude, if that's okay, just with a few top tips, 5 tips. Have I got time, Maria?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay. So my quick top tips are: 1, ask questions when you can, and it's fine to raise these by email. Don't be quiet, sort of get involved. 2, challenge the employer's thinking. Has the employer thought about pooling? How are they selecting people from that pool? Has the employer considered alternative roles for you within the group? Are there any other ways to avoid redundancy? Really push if you can. 3, consider if there might be some level of discrimination taking place. Is a particular group disadvantaged? Are women being disadvantaged relative to men in terms of how redundancy is taking place? 4, know what your baseline entitlements are. Know that statutory redundancy and notice and accrued holiday are your rights automatically, and they're not employer concessions, and you should be looking for things on top. And finally, number 5, if possible, find out if there are any enhanced entitlements that tend to be provided to other individuals. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand over to you now, Maria, to carry on.
Thank you very much, Dominic. That was very interesting indeed, and the top 5 tips were illuminating to bring it all together. And also, I've noticed from the web chat that we've got people who are very much interested in this. We've had one member who's said that she's just been made redundant, and we've got one of the football clubs also who are going through redundancy at the moment. So both of those members are avidly listening to what you just said, Dominic, and hopefully they have got some clarity on some of their questions. But if not, we do have, as I said before, the question facility that you can just ask some questions. Actually, I think I forgot to mention this. Please do ask some questions if you have any, and hopefully we will get a chance to go through them at the end. So please put them in the web chat, and they'll be filtered through to me. Okay, moving on to Alan. Alan, please do give us your personal and professional lockdown experience before answering this next question. You've obviously supported some very high profile cases in relation to these matters and discrimination in particular, such as Sean Macielis. So if you can give us some advice in relation to unions in particular, do you think it's useful to join a union before any redundancy situation arises? And what will unions do to assist?
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you everybody for joining. So in terms of my lockdown experience first, it's been really very strange. Having to, for all of the employing bodies that I represent members in, try to get people safely out of the workplace, arrange for them to be working from home in a way that meant that they could carry out childcare, so getting the flexibility, and in negotiating with employers over equipment. But also what we've done with some success was to build on the furlough arrangements that the government brought in for 80% of pay to be covered, and we were able to negotiate for it with a number of employers to get that up to 100%, so people didn't actually lose money. So there was a long period of doing that, and then we put the levers into reverse to try and negotiate with employers for people to return. So an awful lot of work on risk assessment processes, including the safety of referees in coming back to Premier League and Championship football. A lot of training of our representatives to enable them to help with that process. And also getting people back to a point where they had confidence in coming back to the office. And like Dom, I'm in the office actually this morning presenting this. So those are really my experiences. So apart from the wall-to-wall Zoom calls from morning to evening, it's been a really quite strange process. Unfortunately, one of the things we're obviously now getting into as we come to the end of the furlough scheme is unfortunately redundancy. And I'm dealing with this now on a regular basis. I will have 3 calls today on people who are going through the redundancy process. It can be very unsettling and very difficult for members to go through, to lose a job after any length of time, but certainly for people who've had a job for some time, to lose that can be extremely unsettling. And the spoiler alert in all of this is you really should be advised, and I really would advise you to join a union and join before you get into a redundancy situation. We can only really represent members if they have, if they're in membership when the problem arises, and no union will really represent people who turn up with a problem asking us to get involved. So I really appreciate Dominic's advice to you to join a union. And just in terms of the collective work we do on redundancies, we do an awful lot in terms of reducing the number of redundancies, improving the selection process, negotiating an improvement in redundancy payments, and ensuring that we get voluntary schemes, which can be crucial to making sure that people who might want to move on can do so, and those who want to retain their jobs can do so too. So there's an awful lot of work in that collective process that we can do. But whether you're covered by collective consultation or not, you are entitled to individual consultation. And I thought I would just spend a bit of time on that now. Dominic's covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover, and his top tips are all very good. But the first issue is around representation. And the question about whether you're legally entitled to be represented at a redundancy meeting. And the answer to that is no, but most employers will allow it. Organisations like the Chartered Institute for Professional Development encourage employers to do this, and they do so because it's an important factor in an employer being able to show that they've followed a fair process should the employee then pursue the matter to a grievance or to an employment tribunal. So it's a really important thing to be represented. you can go to a meeting and you might have 3 management members on the other side, and you're trying to do some of the things that Dominic has asked. Doing that on your own can be very, very difficult and foreboding. Doing it with a union representative there who has experience in dealing with these issues gives you a really big advantage. So you should try and join a union and make sure that you try and get a union rep with you. Now, if the employer doesn't allow you to do so, and you believe that there's any aspect of the process that's been unfair, then you can submit a grievance through the grievance procedure. And you can, if necessary, follow this through and follow any difficulties through to an employment tribunal. And unions can help on that, notably by paying your legal fees. But the issue for us as union officials is we always try and avoid that legal approach, and our aim is to try and resolve issues through the consultative process, and that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying not to end up in a tribunal. Nobody wants to do that. We're trying to resolve issues as we go through. And Dominic says it's really important that you understand the reasons for the proposals, and it's absolutely right to get those in writing. But in the consultation meeting, you should probe those reasons that are given. Ask questions. You're entitled to do that, and you need to, for your own benefit, make sure that you understand that there is a genuine redundancy process and why your job is in that consideration, in that pool for consideration. Also make sure that you ask the employer to give you the proposals for the whole organisation. Quite often employers will try and just give you the proposal for your part of it and say that the rest isn't relevant, but it is, because there may be restructured jobs in the rest of the organisation that you might be interested in and you might be able to carry out. So you really need to see the big picture. Make sure that you understand who is in the pool for redundancy, so that you're clear about which jobs are being considered for redundancy and why. And this issue about restructuring roles, quite often organisations will restructure a number of roles, and some of them will remain at around 75 to 80% the same. Some employers will say, well, anybody can apply for any job, but our process has always been to say that if your job is about 75 to 80% the same following the restructure as before, then you should be slotted into it. So you can make the case that you should be slotted into a role. Suitable alternative employment is an interesting one. Sometimes employers will say, well, we're changing your job, but we've got a different one and we think you can do it. And where the skill set and experience is broadly the same, an employer may well have an arguable point there, and you may have to move into that role. But sometimes these restructures can involve changes in hours or location, and they can be much more difficult for people who are carers or for people who have families, and therefore it's important to kick back on those processes. Redundancy payments, yes, as I said earlier, on the collective consultation, unions can help to improve those redundancy payments. But there's nothing to stop you in your consultation meeting from seeking an improved position, and that can be, again, quite useful. Certainly useful to have a union representative there helping you to negotiate on your behalf. And even if you can't improve the redundancy payment process, one important aspect is the issue of outplacement, which some of you may have heard of. And this is about where an employer can help you via a consultant on everything from doing interview training to writing your CV, and even if you're looking to move into becoming your own private contractor, setting yourself up in that way. So do think about the outplacement opportunity as well. One of the main issues, though, is for you to make sure that there is no element of discrimination in the proposals. Do any of the proposals impact disproportionately on women? Do changes in working hours have a disproportionate impact on women? Do changes in location have that process? Is the selection process fair? For example, an employer who tried to say that we want to make all of the part-timers redundant would be risking a discriminatory process there. and also about maternity and if you're on maternity leave and adoption leave, employers have a responsibility and obligation to offer you any suitable vacancy, and failure to do so could lead to automatically unfair dismissal. So just to sum up, the process in all of this is to try and get a resolution through the consultation process. Having a union on your side can be a really big help to you doing that. And getting through this, navigating through a process that can be, as I say, very unsettling and foreboding. So hopefully that's been of some use.
Very useful, Alan. Thank you very much. Some good tips there as well. I can see that we've had one question come in, but do keep them coming. And as I said, we're hoping to get to the questions after we finish with our panelists. So moving on to our next panelist, Margie, can you firstly, like with everyone else, just give us a few words about your lockdown experience, both personally and professionally, and then obviously, the pandemic has been a huge cause of concern for many people on all sorts of levels. So how can we be proactive in upskilling ourselves for this post-COVID landscape?
Thank you, Maria, and thanks a lot to Women's Football for having me today. So the first question regarding the lockdown, as I am in Zurich, so I'm based in Switzerland, my lockdown experience might sound slightly different or quite different from what happened in the UK. So from the personal perspective, I agree with Dom, what he said at the beginning. One of my goals was to keep fit. I achieved that because we had a certain flexibility to actually go out of our homes, and we explored a few places in Switzerland. We took that opportunity of having maybe turning a difficult situation into an opportunity. So we really kept fit. So I'm really happy with my fitness goals during the lockdown, and the things we also were managing to do at home, having all the family around us. So that was great from that perspective. I guess from the professional perspective, one thing that changed completely for us and for many of us, that has been the case, common thing with the UK, is that we had to work from home suddenly 100%. At the Adecco Group, we've been implementing home office now for quite some time. I think our company was able to quickly turn this around and make sure that 34,000 employees were working from home, because we've already been building into that. However, just the idea of not being present in the office at all, not coming in, not, exchanging with our coworkers, that social part of it, I think it kind of impact all of us. And that's something that definitely I experienced. Moving on after the lockdown here in Switzerland, what we have seen is an increased percentage on home office and increased flexibility on how much we should be present in the office. For example, here in our headquarters, if there is a business need, or if we have meetings where there is a group of people that we need to discuss more closely, then we come to the office. Otherwise, we're like between 50 to 60% still working from home, which we find that actually quite positive from our perspective. Given the work you do, then you can adapt your time. And I think this is good also for mothers, especially, who still bear the responsibility of, being the lead when it comes to childcare. So some of the things have been, I would say, turned a big challenge for humanity and for the different, I would say, contexts and labor markets into an opportunity. I hope that this could be something that we can continue building in for all of us. I guess when it comes to the demands of what COVID-19 is placing us, and we heard from Dominic and Alan on some very technical, I would say, challenges and how to respond to them from that perspective. But I think thinking more broadly into the situation, we have to think in 3 different levels, and one is the level of workers. So of course, even before the pandemic, there was that idea of, being able to expect some security around our income and about the different measures to protect our income, whether it's pay sick leave, or simply the ability to work flexibly and remotely. And now with the COVID-19, these measures are even more appreciated. So I think from the worker perspective, we need to think about more support on the speed of labor transition and the ability to quickly adapt. So upskilling, reskilling is really important. And Alan was mentioning just before that you might be asked to do a different job of what you've been doing previous to COVID-19. So you have to think very smartly about what skills and what transfer skills you have to bring into this new situation. And that's from the worker's perspective. Then from the business perspective, I think many companies need and expect flexibility to respond to these quick changes. And of course, there is that fear of sudden drops or surge demands, or simply the ability of facing bankruptcy. So we also have to think from the company perspective how they quickly adapt and what are the needs that are evolving within the labor market for us to map our skills, our upskilling needs, but also what are those transferable skills and abilities that we have to bring into the table. And also, we also have to think from the government perspective, what is happening at the government level and how the governments have the driving seat on the necessary changes, whether it's to support business, but also to support workers. And one of the key things that governments have huge responsibility is actually on the ability of bringing trainings and new skilling opportunities for workers and for the population more broadly. So from the Adecco Group perspective, if I have to speak more broadly and globally, we are advocating very strongly, even before COVID-19, for a new social contract. And this new social contract help us to put the world of work in a perspective that works for everyone. And this is more important today in the COVID-19, I would say, perspective. And we have to look for this and quickly adapt, especially as workers, from the expectations and the responsibility perspective on those three levels that I mentioned. So individuals have to be actively engaged on training and career opportunities that, whether businesses and governments are providing for them. So they expect this, but they also have the responsibility to engage in this. So don't wait until you are given a notice. Don't wait until really start thinking proactively what is out there, what are the government measures that are put for you out there from the government and the business perspective. Also, you have to think about employers, and they need a more diverse pool. And they need to look at there is a complete new restructuring and reorganization. So they need the right mix of hard and soft skills. And you have to think, and it's your responsibility to think proactively and map those skills, those hard and soft skills that may position yourself better in the current landscape during COVID-19. And I think governments are expected to engage and invest in more trainings relevant to the context of COVID-19. So they have the responsibility to facilitate those trainings, those skillings of workers. So everyone within this new social contract needs to come with their expectations, but also with their responsibilities. So my key message from the individual perspective, and I believe we are going to go a little bit deeper later on what skills we need to bring in and what kind of maybe upskilling opportunities are there. But just now at this point of the webinar, the key message is really to be proactive, to map what are your key soft skills and hard skills, what are the other career opportunities in the current landscape within your company, but also in the broader labor market. And one thing that Alan mentioned is also, if you have the likelihood to be outplaced, look for other opportunities that are out there, trainings and support that your employer could give you for a successful outplacement. This is your right, but also you should have a say on how effective this could be for yourself. So this is really, really important that you start mapping those things. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Margie. You're absolutely right. This is not just all doom and gloom. This is an opportunity as well. So, you know, with everything comes opportunity. So it's good to take this time to upskill, as you say. And that moves us on smoothly to Imogen, who, again, Imogen, if you could just take a few minutes to tell us your personal and professional kind of lockdown experience, but then kind of move on the conversation after Margie's input into exactly what do you think, you know, being on the ground yourself and listening to what employers have to say. So give us the flip side. What are employers actually looking for right now? Are there any new general skills they're looking for, or anything that you would recommend that someone should have in their locker?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, starting off with my personal lockdown experiences, first of all, I think I was one of the many thousands of people in the UK that got hold of a bike somehow and just started cycling, which has been great for a non-driver as well. It's a bit of a scary endeavour at first, but I'm loving it. And professionally, it's been a weird world for us because we're such a people-based industry, and my job relies consistently on meeting and greeting lots of people, shaking lots of hands, which obviously hasn't been happening so much, and moving everything to online and virtual, and sort of making and developing relationships with clients and candidates alike in a really new world. But luckily, I think most of what we do can be delivered very, like this on Zoom calls and so forth. So been a bit of an adjustment, but I think actually, and this takes me, I suppose, on to thoughts on the job market. There is still activity there, and that was the first thing I wanted to say, is that it would be remiss of me, of course, not to acknowledge that there are challenges in terms of the employment market, and that there is difficulties there, but just to reassure there are opportunities. And I think I would reiterate a lot of what Margie said, which is that for many this is an opportunity also to recalibrate, not just sort of make cuts, but also to shuffle things around a bit. Not everybody's got a freeze on, and actually some organizations are really making an opportunity out of this to talent map for the future. We're seeing quite a lot of people doing a lot of pipelining work, looking ahead to what happens in the kind of resurgence of hopefully end of this year, early next year, and thinking about what skills they'll want around the table at that point, and proactively reaching out and speaking with people and wanting to meet people with just maybe a little bit later down the line in front of their minds. In terms of the core skills that we're really seeing come to the fore, some of these probably won't be surprising to you, but a lot of it focuses on digital capabilities, and that's both sort of internally focused and externally focused. So that might be around, audience and market engagement, utilization of social medias, etc., and digital tools to reach out to their audiences. But it also might be much more of the sort of delivery and operational side of digital capabilities. Commercial acumen and financial acumen, and I think actually this isn't necessarily just about financial roles, but it's about, again, acumen and your ability to understand, interpret, look at balance sheets, and think about diversification of incomes, new strategies, and creativity again within that, I think. Again, that's no surprise given what organisations are suffering in terms of the impacts on their bottom lines. And then finally, anything in the kind of broad HR remit. A lot of that, of course, is to do with the fact that these reshaping exercises are going on, and that people are having to handle very difficult HR processes. So that is definitely a top priority. The one thing that we are very buoyed by, and I think it's not without challenges in some ways, is that actually diversity focused roles are really coming to the fore as well. So picking up on Margie's point that unfortunately it's come about from some difficult circumstances in terms of George Floyd's murder and some of the anti-racism protests, but hopefully that comes to the positive side about momentum in change in society. And just a point on that, really, I think if anyone is involved in that area professionally, or is having people reach out to them with that in mind, or conversations around that, it's really important to kind of consider, is this a knee-jerk response, or is this authentic? What have been the company's corporate values in the prior build-up to that? But overall, I think that diversity is highly sought at the moment, and this comes back to Margie's point, and that is, yes, partially about the kind of protected characteristics in terms of diversity, but it is also really about diversity in terms of the way people think. You know, you can't rest on your laurels and have groupthink at the moment. People are really seeking, and I think actually above all and more so than most of the hard skill sets we're seeing people talking more about the soft skill sets in terms of creativity, agility, ability to adapt to new challenges and think differently. So I think anything you can do, and that hopefully is something that's translatable across lots of different job profiles, anything you can do to show examples of that, and to come forward, I think, with ideas and innovation is what people are going to really want to see. I was also asked us to touch a little bit on, I guess, if you are seeking a new job or if you're looking at updating your LinkedIn and CV, etc., then just to focus a few bits on those. I won't reiterate too much in terms of some of the things that Margie said, but I think that, you know, the point around taking time to reflect is huge. I think that's on, you know, your personal values, what you want from a job, what matters to you now in a very different world, but also the corporate values. What have you seen is good and bad about other companies, and what do you really want to seek in your next employer? And then those skills that you've acquired during this time. Lots of that will be, I'm sure, around kind of crisis management, but, you know, chairing meetings virtually and so forth as well. The biggest thing I think you can do is yes, keep an eye on the adverts that are coming out, but it's also reaching out to your contacts, leveraging that networks, having conversations, because there are unfortunately still a lot of roles that aren't advertised, but it's also about that piece I mentioned, what's coming later down the line. A lot of organisations are thinking about the next 3, 6, 9 months and what their workforce needs to look like for that. So there's no harm in connecting a bit early, frankly. And also just know you're not alone. So seek out other job seekers, because I think actually sometimes there's no point, you know, reinventing the wheel. They may have got learnings they can easily share with you. So I think it is about that proactivity that's been mentioned, you know, going out and making sure you are leveraging your networks as much as is possible, and being bold in that approach as well. Reach out to people like myself and other people at recruitment firms. You know, that's what we're here for a large part. See, you're updating your CV and LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is a great tool, and I think in many ways I would probably prioritize your time on that sort of side of things rather than the CV necessarily, because the CV is great, and there's some things I can definitely pass on in you know, mindful of time in terms of how to create a great CV. But actually LinkedIn is a social media, and therefore it's got that engagement element that I referred to about making sure you're connecting with people. I think that it's remembering that two-way system on LinkedIn. You can't sit there sort of, you know, inactive. It's about, you know, liking and follow organizations that resonate, congratulate other people on changes. And I think, again, even if you're you know, not sure what's going on in your organization, take time to do that sort of thing now. Invest proactively in you know, the housekeeping and the hygiene around what your LinkedIn profile looks like as well, so you're ready and you've got an idea of what's going on. The one top bit of advice I would give any person in terms of doing a CV or a application generally is, yes, you need to focus on your responsibilities and things like the size and scale of whatever you manage, but it's really about focusing on the achievements. So there's the responsibilities and then there's the achievements, and you really want to make sure the latter come out. I think the biggest pitfall we see is people spending too much time probably on this is what my role is, that rather than this is what I have done and how you've moved things from A to B. And then probably secondly, just really engaging with the job ad, the specification, the organization that you're looking to move towards, making sure that actually it's probably 50-50 in terms of how much you talk about yourself versus how much you talk about them and their vision and what they're looking to do. So make sure you kind of do the homework in that regard. I'm happy to also, I know we've sort of fairly short on time, so I don't want to dominate too much, but happy to answer any questions there are on things like, you know, virtual interviewing. Some of that is the basics, but really happy to answer any questions on interviews and kind of assessment techniques as well, if that's useful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Imogen. That's very, very useful. Some good practical tips there. And you mentioned networks and making sure you tap into your network. And of course, Women in Football is a fantastic network. And I've seen, some of the women already on the web chat kind of talk about themselves, and they're looking for opportunities and things. So do reach out to each other and harness that amazing network that Jane and everyone has put together. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper. I know we don't have long, so Margie, if you could really kind of finalize what we're talking about with and just kind of discuss in more detail the different skills and qualities that people who are listening can really kind of hone in on to get these better opportunities that Imogen was referencing.
Sure, thank you, Maria. I think again, I'll like to frame this into an opportunity to reflect on our career journey and on our next steps. And one thing that I always like to reflect on when we talk about career development is to look at what is our purpose. Maybe this is a moment to reflect what is our North Star in our career. And on that, there is a great framework that is kind of mapping yourself from the skills you have. So what are the things that you can be paid for? What are the skills that I have today? What are the skills that are in demand? And we just heard mentioned some of the key skills that are in demand today that have been before COVID, but now more than ever is digital communication skills. And if I have them, what else can I do to hone those skills? But if I don't, then I feel that passion and my purpose is linked to those particular skills somehow. Where are the courses that will give me what I need to get there as well? There's also the customer services skills that are very high in demand. And I think customer service skills never go out of style. But in COVID-19, with companies being so much more in high demand to respond fast and quickly, but also to help the benefit of the consumers as fast as possible, to respond to the consumers' demands as fast as possible. Someone with great customer skills actually come in a higher, I would say, opportunity to position his or herself better in this context. There is also the STEM skills that are becoming more and more in demand. So if you have had the passion for science, technology, or engineer or math, and these are skills that you still have, but where else can you develop more? These are also very specific technical skills on high demand. And one thing that we should never forget is always the importance of soft skills and emotional intelligence. So in a crisis moment, or uncertain moment for all of us, it's particularly important that we look at those skills that we bring in and how can we support what is happening in our company and the team, but also if we can bring in for a particular, I would say, new career opportunity. So I think we have to think holistically about ourselves and map those skills, but also think, what is the next step of my career? Is that linked to my purpose? And what can I be paid for today, but also what I can be paid for in the future, and what courses, what kind of resources I could develop from that perspective. I think we also have to think about if it's a moment for us to jump from one career to the other. And here, maybe in this context, since we are talking to a community that is in the world of sports, in the world of football, let's think about that as an athlete too. So athletes, there is a moment in their career, footballers, that they have to stop and they have to think more broadly about the labor market. And it could be painful. And that might be a moment for some of us as well, to reach a point where we might have to jump from one career to the other because of the context of COVID-19 and how the labor market is changing. So what are the transferable skills that I have from one, I would say, career to the other? Is that communication skills, people skills, character strength, basic technical skills like writing, typing, editing. So all of those things can help us to jump to another opportunity into the labor market. And so I think with that in mind, for example, I would suggest that you and everyone that is interested around this webinar, that you look at a lot of these new or common in-demand skills like digital skills or emotional intelligence skills that could help you, whether making a career jump or whether continue within your company. Really map what is in demand around your context. And just one last message. I see Jane now on the screen. Maybe this is a moment to wrap up, but one last message that I think we should leave this community with is that we all have talent and we all bring in great things. It's about adapting to the context. And one quote that I love when it comes to career development from Einstein, I will read it to all of you, is that everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb the tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. So really think, where is your passion? Where is your purpose? What are those skills you have to continue driving your career in what you are good at, or what you feel you really could be good at? So that's from my perspective. Back to you, Jane and team.
Thank you very much, Margie. That's excellent. We can't beat a quote to end the whole seminar on, so that's fantastic. We had a couple of questions, but they've been dealt with in the web chat. So it just remains for me to say thank you to our fantastic panelists. So thank you to Dominic, Alan, Margie, and Imogen. You've been very, very illuminating this morning. And thank you again to Women in Football for allowing us to put on this panel. And I'll hand over to Jane to say a few words to see us out. Over to you, Jane.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. Really rich discussion, and I love the fact that we had so many angles on it. We had the legal angle, we had the thinking about what next, some real practical stuff, and a moment of absolute uplift from Margie at the end, which I know that's what she does. She tells us all we're all geniuses and we'll leave on a high. Couple of quick reflections from my personal experience. Very sadly, I worked at a football club many years ago, about 18 years ago, and we did have to make 90 people redundant. We went through it, and a big consultation process. The things people said to us in the consultation did change the ultimate outcome. We listened, and actually some of the things the staff said made us refine our proposals and make them better. So if sadly you're going through this, what you say can be influential. And the other thing, we've put it on the chat, but at Women in Football, we work hard to publicise jobs in football, mindful that, as Margie says, everyone's a genius. Everybody is. And there's a host of opportunities there. As many as we can find or we get told of, we put on our website, we put on our Twitter, so do keep an eye on that. We're over time, we could have kept going. Let us know what you thought about this webinar at events@womeninfootball.co.uk. Let us know if you'd like us to come back and talk more about this topic with this wonderful group of experts here. And really all the best to everybody. We know it's tough times, but we will get through this. Remember those uplifting words from Margie, and I think it was Imogen, or forgive me if I've got it wrong, who said, if you're in this situation, remember it can be an opportunity as well. So very best of luck to you. And we at Women in Football are here to support you. So get in touch if we can help. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day and great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.